what my dad was thinking when he took his own life. I understand that feeling, that pain, the want for those thoughts and feelings to just stop. You do anything for it to stop. I understand, but I also understand the loss of death, the finality of it, the ripple effect it has on the world around us. When my dad died, it wasn't just death. For so many people, it was loss and hatred and anger. For some, it was depression, a life-shattering loss. Some people didn't even notice. The rest of the world doesn't even care. Most of the people in my life now just know my dad through secondhand stories. The people in this episode, we are keepers of my dad's memories. We hold fragments of him in our minds forever. We have to live with those fragments. We have to live with the way those fragments have affected us. Until recently, I really never knew what my fragments even were, and how they fit together with everyone else's fragments, but slowly, I am discovering that all of these fractals are just pieces of the same puzzle. They're all part of a person that we knew, and all parts of a person that we lost. And each fragment is different. Mine is labeled Dad and contains hit pieces like childhood trauma and abandonment issues. And my abandonment issues fits together with someone else's undisputed anger. And their undisputed anger is adjacent to someone else's I miss my best friend. I miss my dad. I miss my dad a lot, and not just because of the negative effects his death had on me, but because I miss him, and he was much more of a person than I or anyone could ever convey in our stories. He was more of a person with all of his flaws and triumphs and compassion and anger than any of you listeners will ever know. He was a person, and that's why his death is so hard. That's why his suicide is so frustrating, so confusing. I once heard loss described as circles. That there are certain clubs we're put into when death or loss happens. The people that are affected from afar, and the people whose entire lives changed. Personally, I believe that loss is more like a ripple. The people that are in the ripples closest to the loss, the people that used to see and love this person every day, can't ignore the ripple of death. These ripples are chaotic and disruptive and hard to ignore. As you get farther away, the ripples are less intense, easier to forget, but we are all still being affected by the same ripple. And really, we don't know how far those ripples are going to spread. And maybe some are closer to the boulder of death than others, but none of us are unaffected. The death of my father is something that I both never talk about and something that I always talk about. To be honest, his death doesn't affect my day-to-day life. I don't live under the constant dark cloud of grief. I don't talk about it to the people I know very often. But also, I talk about it all the time. I've written about it dozens and dozens of times. I joke about it. I pinpoint his death as the origin of all my trauma. But still, I've never talked about it like this. I've never sat down and fully answered the question, how did my dad's death affect me? And it isn't really a question I ever wanted to ask. Until now. Hello, Internet. My name is Ephie, and this is The Human Condition. In case you don't remember, or you've never listened to this podcast before, my dad committed suicide when I was 11, February 13th, 2009. It was an extremely messy situation, with my dad being charged with some sort of sexual misconduct, or assault of a teenage girl from our church. No one knows if he's guilty or not. He didn't really leave a suicide note, and nobody ever got any closure. I now have daddy issues and purple hair. The end. Sorry, I tried to stop the sarcasm, but come on. If anyone gets to make daddy issue jokes, it's me. All jokes aside, the first person I asked was Elle. Elle met my dad once, when we were young and I had a pool party. I was affluent, I had a pool in my backyard, and there were hardly any classmates that didn't come to my pool. But other than just having a picture taken on a pool floaty, the only proof that we have that Elle ever actually met my dad, they never talked. They never met. But he is part of the ripple because He loves me. The version of me whose father killed himself when she was 11. My dad's death impacts us because it impacts me. And I thought that that would be a good place to start.
So I only got to meet your dad once, but it was as a child, so I wouldn't really count that very much. I don't remember a lot from that time either. I didn't even remember I ever went over to your house until you actually brought it up to me, to be completely honest about it. So we could easily say that I didn't really get to meet him or know him as a person, but I could still see the resonance of not having him there with you. It's much smaller in the ways it affects me and our relationship, but it's still there in ways. I mean, most boyfriends would probably be nervous to meet their girlfriend's dad, but I never had to go through that because he hasn't been around at this point in your life. It's, I guess, not easier, but stranger just to have one parent to connect with. I mean, if I were to ever ask for your hand in marriage, who would walk you down the aisle? Your mother, I guess? I don't even know how that works. And even though it's small things like that, it's also large things like that. The fact that I had to teach you how to use an electric screwdriver was both strange, but something that I had taken for granted up until that point. Just simple things that don't cross most people's minds. So yeah, I could say it affects me that your father's not around, but naturally, wouldn't it?
Sometimes, even when a loss doesn't affect you, it does. Because sometimes it affects the people you love. And we love the people we love. We would even probably die for some of them. Maybe. Sometimes. But only hypothetically. We would definitely write a hate tweet for the people we love. That's a high love standard, if you ask me. These are my cousins, Katie and Sarah, and while they didn't know my dad well enough to feel that gape of grief, and while they don't have that person-shaped hole in their lives because of my dad, their mom does.
Angel and I have been talking about it for a while and trying to figure out exactly how your dad's death made us feel. And before I even say our opinion about it, I do want to point out that we didn't know him that well. We know he was my cousin, and he's my mom's best friend, and we know he made that trip to Puerto Rico fantastic. And that's the best memory we have. The only memory, really, that I have of him is when we went to Puerto Rico for Christina and Christian's wedding, and he really made that trip the best that it could be. But every time I think about your dad and how he died, it really just makes me think of, unfortunately, it seemed like a coward. And I know I don't want to sully his name or say anything negative about him, but in reality, when I think of suicide, and I know that's not always the case, I know it's not completely a coward situation, but that's what I think about. And I hate thinking of him like that, because to me, he was this awesome guy who brought all this light into a room and made everybody feel fantastic. And I know for somebody to take their life, they must have been going through a lot. And I know I don't know what he was going through, and I don't know the situations behind everything, but I hate to say that, but unfortunately, suicide just, when I look at it in the rearview mirror, it just looks like a coward's way out. And it makes me angry that he left. Makes me angry that he left my mom. He was her best friend, and it makes me mad that he felt like his only way out was to leave. And honestly, I don't want to sully his name or really say anything bad, but unfortunately, your dad's death made me feel like he took the coward's way out.
Okay, so when I think about it, I really didn't know him as well as other people. I know when I was younger, we had spent time together when he was visiting, and at weddings, but I don't really remember him aside from like pictures and like stories. I do remember tons of stories from my mom. That's the most memories I have of Steve, is the stories she would tell me about them growing up and how she would laugh and they would light up while they were talking and getting into trouble and all the silly things that they used to do. And it reminded me of my relationship with my cousin Kevin. So it was like when my mom got the news, it was like she lost her Kevin. So I knew what she'd be going through, like, because I know how I would feel if I lost Kevin. But when I think about it, death usually makes people sad, but sadness never really hit me because I was too busy being mad that he chose to leave. And instead of dealing with his issues and talking to people and getting help, he chose to leave his wife, his daughter, his friends, his family, and opt out. And I think the biggest angry point for me and things that make me the most upset is he did leave without a note, without an explanation. So it leaves him, unfortunately, in my opinion, and I'm sorry to say, looking guilty. It makes him look like he was losing this battle, so he just opted out. And I even hate saying that out loud because he was such an amazing person and he brought so much life and energy into the world, into people that he came in contact with and his friends and his family. But unfortunately for me, it still makes me feel angry. He left with no closure, no note, no answers. And I think that even if his thought process was this was the best thing to do at the time for my family so that I'm not dragging them through all this negativity, the end all be all is, it makes me angry that he thought this was his best way out and that he didn't give anybody a chance to help him.
If I'm being honest, I don't remember too much of my dad's side of the family. A tragic family suicide will do that to you. But I could tell when making this episode that Martha really does care about my dad. The perspective she has of my dad and of his younger days are memories that I will never really know about a different Steve in a different time with different thoughts. That was Steve, the teenager, Steve the kid, not Steve, my father. When people die, sometimes I think it's hard to remember them as more than just stories. My dad was not just one thing. He didn't have just one role. I think Martha's memories helped remind me of that.
How did your dad's death affect me? You want to know. Just like Dawn, I was very angry. My first thought was, how dare you leave me? You checked out when things got tough. You made a mistake. It sucks. But you'll survive. That's what you would have told me. So your halo was tarnished. So you're really not perfect. You screwed up. I know that was a hard concept to deal with. People not thinking you were wonderful. Hey, my daughter Katie said you brought life and happiness wherever you went. The thought of somebody being mad at you didn't sit well with you. How dare you take the easy way out? I said easy, yes. It would have been a lot harder to stay and face the music. I'm still mad at you. I miss your dad so very much. We were two peas in a pod, best friends. Even though we lived miles apart, he was my partner in crime. He lied and I'd swear to it, or vice versa. He always reminded me that he was the oldest and he used to change my diaper. He was only 2 weeks older than me. When we were little, our family visits, we were inseparable. As we got older and had a car, my friends and I would drive to Butterworth Park. I still remember at Christmas morning, like Carol said, they would open all their gifts and rewrap them before Aunt Irene came home. He could not wait to tell me how many gifts he got. He always had more stuff than me. We were always there for each other. As we got older and as soon as we had cars, he would call me or I would call him. We were there. We both were dating our high school sweethearts. We started at the same time, him with Denise and me with Tommy. We dated for years. When Denise broke up with him, he had a hard time dealing with that. Or the time my parents and your grandmother went to Europe for 3 weeks and left us home by ourselves. Furniture was moved out, the band moved in, Tommy's band party began. Truth be known, that was the first time he smoked pot. I forgot to mention we were only 15 and a half. Crazy. Or the time he had it with Carol. Sorry, Carol, we did not like you very much when we were teenagers. He could not take you anymore. He called me, I drove out there, and together we drove you crazy. It made us feel better. Or when his dad came in the picture, I went with him to be reintroduced. He hated his dad. The only stuff we knew was what my aunt had told us, and it wasn't very pretty. She only told us her side. As we got older, he grew to love him. Then we had the year that he signed up for the Navy, and I moved into his room, my first year of college. He told his friends to take care of me, which they all did. With him being stationed in Virginia Beach, it was not a big deal for Tommy and I, and sometimes my girlfriend, to drive 12 hours to visit him for 24 hours, party, and drive back. Then there was my wedding. I wanted him to be my best person, but that was not heard of 40 years ago. So instead, he was Tommy's groomsman. Then my mother and your grandmother and her cousins were out. My mother fell and hit her head. It was kept a secret, and your grandmother being the secret holder. The end results brought death to my mother and ended my relationship with my aunt. Your dad was right by my side. Your grandmother made a mistake by not telling me, and she would never admit it. Then we had California. Very sad when he left Framingham for all the wrong reasons, but perfect when he met your mom, whom he fell in love with. But his drinking was getting in the way, so he worked at it by himself and with his faith and stopped on March 17th. And then you came along. He would tell me he does the prim and proper stuff like tea parties and dressing up and everything that she needs to know, and I get to do all the crazy and fun stuff. He told me you were perfect, and he loved being with you. When I got the call of your dad's death, the world came crashing down on me. I blamed myself. I felt I should have seen the signs when we spoke, or me even looking at his Facebook. But I never did until after. Finally, the anger came out. I will never forgive him for what he did to you, the person that he loved so much. Or to me, when something happens in my life now, good or bad, he's not there to share. I have lots of pictures from Puerto Rico with you and your dad. At times I look at these pictures and get very mad because I don't get it. How could he leave you knowing how much this would screw up your future, your life, and your happiness? Carol had the ashes divided. I still have a piece of your dad with me, which I will be taking and putting it in a sun catcher someday. I try to tuck him away so it doesn't hurt. It works some days, but most days I find myself either talking to him or to my mom, looking for guidance. I still get very angry at him. I will never forgive him for what he did or how he left the mess.
When I think of Aunt Dawn, I feel the sickest, strongest sense of nostalgia in the pit of my stomach. Those few blissful years of childhood I had involved Aunt Dawn and Trev and Emma and Uncle Rick. For the sake of not doxing them, we'll call them the T family. They're not my real family. We're not related in law or blood. Even though I'm literally not related to anyone in my family by blood, but, you know. But 23 years later, and to me, Aunt Dawn is still Aunt Dawn. The T family is literally the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb incarnate. Aunt Dawn was both my mom's and my dad's best friend, from what I remember. Trevor, Emma, and I were best friends with proxy, but I think that still counts. When my dad died, it was half a decade after my family moved to Colorado from California. The dynamic we had with the T family at that point was different but good. Our families were still best friends. Every summer they would come out here and visit, and it was one of my favorite times of the year. After my dad died, my mom and I, the only family that I have, and the T family didn't talk as much, We didn't really talk about my dad's death that I remember. The last time I saw any of them in person was when I went to visit them for my 16th birthday. I never knew how anyone felt about my dad's death, especially not my Aunt Dawn. I was afraid that she wouldn't answer when I asked, but she did.
So how did your dad's death affect me? It made me angry. It still makes me angry. Your dad and I talked about so many plans for our family's future, things we were going to do together, things we would do in our old age with grandkids, and his death stopped all of that. Of course, when you moved to Colorado, things changed, but that death, his death, stopped everything. It stopped future plans. It stopped future hopes. It stopped. And it still makes me angry. I wish I could say I have found forgiveness. I will be honest and say, knowing your dad the way I did, I know he couldn't have lived with what was going on in his life at that time. He was too insecure about what people thought. But regardless, I'm angry. I'm angry that he took that route. I'm angry at how that changed your life, how that changed your mom's life, how that changed my family's life, my kids' life who loved your dad as their second dad. So to make it short and simple, his death affected everything and has left me still very angry with him.
I wonder a lot, what would be different if my dad was alive? The T family is one of those things. I'm now an adult with my own life and my own career. I send the T family combined a total of 3 to 4 text messages a year. I haven't seen them in almost a decade, and I can't help but to think that the loss of our close relationship is just another consequence of my dad's suicide. Other than Aunt Dawn, my dad did have a biological sister, my Aunt Carol. My Aunt Carol is probably the family member on my dad's side that I've kept in touch with the most. She's always made me feel included on that side, which has been nice. She sent her portion in writing, so her passage is going to be narrated by my close friend Katie.
How did Stephen's death affect me? Well, even though Stephen and I were not always the closest of siblings, it was always nice to know he was there when I needed to discuss things concerning my parents. I really missed having him around when my parents were in the last years of their life. Growing up, I was always the stronger emotionally of the two of us, maybe because I was the oldest, my personality, or maybe many times because it was just the two of us, since my mother worked a lot, and the responsibility was just expected of me to handle things. Stephen was always the more sensitive of the two of us, and he didn't remember a lot of the things that went on when we were growing up like I did. He always seemed to be searching for some peace in his life. I miss those last few years of his life when we started to get closer and we were able to talk about those long ago experiences. I thought it was helping him to understand more about his feelings towards things, but maybe it could have affected his more sensitive side. Reality can be hard when it finally hits you. I saw that happen with him. The last time I saw him when we were in Puerto Rico at Christina's wedding was the best we ever got along. He seemed more at ease when we talked. That was May of 2008. By his birthday in December of that year, I noticed in his Facebook posts that he seemed troubled again. I called him to see if he was okay, and we messaged back and forth, and he assured me that he was fine. When I came home in February of 2009, after shopping for Valentine's Day, to the news that he was gone was one of the hardest days for me. Even though with what was going on in his life at the time, I can sort of understand why he took the easy way out for his problems. I've also been very angry with him at times when he wasn't there when I needed him to be. I am, however, thankful for my girls who helped me with my parents in their last years. My mother with Alzheimer's, who always talked about Stephen, and my father with dementia, who had trouble remembering Stephen. Dealing with all this while recovering from breast cancer made me angry that he wasn't here to help with them when I needed him to be. I still don't like to think about it. I miss him. At his memorial service in Colorado, I felt I owed it to him to talk about our Christmases and how every year it was just the two of us most of the day, and how we worked together opening and resealing the presents under the tree. Those were the best times. His ashes are buried in my town in the vault with my father's ashes. I think of him most every day, and I stop by every 2 weeks just to say hi to both of them and say a prayer. It is comforting to know that he is close.
Unfortunately, death does not discriminate. It doesn't care how old you are when it comes for you. Emma, who was Aunt Dawn's daughter, was 9 when my dad died. And I wish for her it was different. I wish that this didn't have to be a memory that she had. There are a lot of things I remember about Emma. I remember when she called an antelope a cantaloupe, and to this day I still call antelope cantaloupes. I remember we went to Wyoming, I think it was. We were on a road trip, and my dad wanted illegal fireworks, and she bought a buffalo. I remember that she was bigger than me, and bolder than me, and braver than her brother. I never thought of her as younger. I didn't ever consider her someone that needed protecting. She was the first person to respond to my inquiries about this project, and her story broke my heart. Because I wish that when I was 11, I would have thought to protect her. I wish I could have.
So this is kind of weird for me. I have never talked to any family member about my uncle's death. It was really one of the things that really just sticks out from looking back at it was that I answered the phone call that told my parents that he had passed away. I remember it so vividly. I was, probably 8, 7, somewhere around 8, playing with my Polly Pockets, having a grand old time. I had the phone in the room and it rang, so I answered it. I took it to my parents, and being the curious little person I was, I waited outside the door to hear what it was. And instead of hearing oh, so-and-so, I just heard my dad start crying. It was the first time I ever seen him cry like that. And I don't think I ever heard him cry that hard since. I've seen him cry, but I've never heard it myself. This was the first time I knew something was up, and so I just ran back into my room and waited until they called us down and told us that Uncle Steve passed away. They told us that it was a car accident, I think. It was something with a car and a bridge. That's all I remember. I don't remember what they told us, but then I know months later they told us it was actually it's through suicide. And I still don't know fully what happened, and I don't think I want to. I like being a kid and thinking he died in a car crash. That's how I like thinking about it. I don't like trying to imagine any other way. It's not fun. But when they told us, I didn't cry. Everybody else was crying, but I just couldn't. I don't know what it was. I couldn't process it. I think I was just still too young. I don't know. or it just wasn't, I don't know, but it took me like 2 years later to fully like begin to process it. Like 5th, 6th grade was when I finally was like coming to terms, like, he's gone. He's gone. Like, that's when I finally actually mourned for him. It took years. And then it rolled into middle school. And that's when I experienced my first time with mental illness. And depression was really intense. Really intense. And it put me in a spot where I could look back and be like, wow, I get it now. I get why he would do something like this. I get why someone can go, this is too much, I'm done. I've been there. I think I've been to the lowest. I was way too young. And I don't think my parents realize that. I think they like to say that life's only gonna get harder. I'm like, yeah, but my mental health it's reached the lowest it ever could have gotten. It's gotten there. I have failed suicide attempts that my parents don't know about. Maybe they will now, I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. Going through middle school put me through a whole new perspective of understanding. And then also being sad that that's where he was. And having no idea. Because anytime we went out there, he was just this light, you know? Like, yeah, I loved being around you, and we would roller skate, we did all these shenanigans, just trampoline fun, just so much playing and laughter. But I feel like he was the center of it all. He was the light. He was my Uncle Steve. All the solid memories I have of my childhood come from that man and being out there with you guys. That was what I loved most in my childhood, and it went away. And that's sad. Because I wish it never ended. I wish we yearly would go out still. I wish we were able to go during the wintertime, like we always wanted to, and snowboard, but those years have long passed. Yeah, his life affected me a lot. I still have all of the knickknacks we got on our trip to Wyoming. I have pictures hanging in our room, or in my room, of us. And it took probably like 5 years to fully mourn him, because he just, like I said, he was just such a light. He was happiness. He was someone who I think understood me even younger. Like, I remember I was always told I was so sensitive and all this stuff, but I feel like he treated me special at the times I needed it. And he was really good at that. I miss him a lot.
Despite how much I wish it was different, my dad's death has not brought me closer to anyone that has suffered the same loss. It has, however, bonded me for life to one person, and that person is Tessa, my former best friend. We are no longer best friends. Right now I'd even go so far to say that we have very little in common. But my dad's death and the experience we had to go through together as children bonded us forever. I'm not sure how I feel about things like twin flames or soul bonds. But our lives are definitely entwined in a way that a lot of people wouldn't understand. Because Tessa is not just my best friend. On that day, she was there. She was a part of it, caught up in the middle. She is the only other child in the entire world that will remember what happened that day.
I think, how I was affected, and probably even how my family is affected, is very different than most people involved, just because, obviously, family, y'all took it a lot harder, but we were also, as a family, and your family, we were so close to each other, and how everything played out, I just feel like it's a very different side of things, because it's not like I was just your friend and I hear my mom tells me this happened, because, I was told like that, but it's not like I was just told that and then got to go give you a hug, tell you I loved you, and go to the memorial and everything like a lot of people did. I think the basic thing that most people need to know is my family was the most, we knew. So my mom knew before your mom did, and then I knew before you did, which that was the fact that I knew before you wasn't the biggest problem. The problem was us going to your house, and then we spent all that time together, and you didn't know. And I knew. I cried the whole way to your house. I was it hurt. Your family was my family. Your dad was my second dad at the time, and we were so young that it was I think the second death in my life that I had to deal with, and it was so personal and so close and in a different way than what most people have to experience at that age. And I just remember getting there, pulling up, and being told, you can't, she doesn't know. They haven't told her yet. And then me having to pretend I didn't know what was going on. And then I literally went upstairs with you, and I think we were up there for an hour. And I just remember sitting there, and you were sitting there yeah, they can't find my dad. I think they found his car. The police are trying to find him. And I'm a little scared. Can we pray? And can we read the Bible? And we were doing all that stuff. And the whole time, I'm trying to be there for you, and be supportive, and be just be your best friend, And it was but I knew where he was, and I knew what had happened. And then to go downstairs and not only know you were getting told, but to hear how it all happened, hear it happen, and hear you go to the room with your mom and my dad, and hear them telling you what happened, and hearing your reaction, just it hurt. And I don't know if you remember much, but at that point, I was bawling my eyes out, but it was hard for me to develop tears any further than that. I've always been a tired, sad person. I sleep when I'm sad, and I know we've talked about it a little bit, where we pretty much went upstairs, watched movies, and I fell asleep on the bed, eventually made it downstairs on a couch where there was pizza, never ate the pizza, and I don't really remember, it might just be because it was traumatic too, but I don't remember anything much. It's very patchy after the rest of the night after you found out. And initially, I don't think I noticed the trauma. Since being in the 5th grade at the time, all of my friends were you and it was our girlfriends, our little group of, what was that time, 4 of us? Yeah. And it's not I was around people who didn't know, because they both knew. And so it was I think the next year we went into 6th grade, and then I remember my mom telling me beforehand, hey, you can't talk about this. This isn't something you can share. This is for to share. If she's not ready to share, then don't share it. And I remember how hard that was at first. Initially it really didn't bother me. And I was okay, I'm here for I'm gonna love her. If she needs a support, I'm here for her. If she wants to tell people, I'll help her, things like that. And I know eventually we started talking to a couple of our friends, and over time you became more open about it. But I realized over that time period too that I kind of lost a lot of emotional capacity. It started out as simply not expressing a lot and just keeping my emotions inside, which is not healthy. And that really probably stemmed from having to suppress that hurt and that sadness when I was with you, and again being such a young age. And it was just I wasn't expressing that, and I wouldn't cry. At first, I just wouldn't cry in front of people. I wouldn't cry, and then eventually I just wouldn't cry alone. And I felt like I had to protect everyone. And even after you were open about it, I remember feeling like it was my job and my duty to protect you. And that made it, you were my best friend, but I felt like I couldn't tell you about my own hurt because I couldn't hurt you more. I couldn't make you know that there was people around you also hurting because this was your hurt. And to me, I felt like it took me a really long time in my life to realize that, hey, it's okay for me to be hurt from that situation. It took me probably well into being out of high school even. And it's still something I struggle with today. Like I internalize everything and I just hold it all in, and I'm really good at being there for people now, which is great. I'm amazing at listening to people's problems and being there and sitting there and letting them talk to me, but I'm so bad expressing them myself. It's really hard for me to sit down and tell somebody about my past, and it became to a point where in order to explain who I truly am, I had to give them a backstory of this happened when I was little, when I was 10 or 11, and it impacted my whole life. It caused me to feel like be different, and I don't know how to fully explain it, but I know that it hit me in a different way. And because I was holding in all these emotions, it caused me to be very depressed. But I would hide the depression. I had this really bad talent of smiling all the time. And a lot of people ask me, oh, why do you smile all the time? And I'm like, oh, well, I just smile because it makes me come off friendly. But really, it's just an automatic response, I guess, for me, is put a smile on your face because things could always be worse. You could always be another person in that situation. You could have always had something worse happen. Like, this is not the worst thing in the world. You're okay. No matter what the situation is. So I slap that smile on my face, I go on, and even when I'm having my downfalls, like my moments where I'm sad, it's hard. And I think now, being a little bit older and it being a while, I've learned how to deal with it a lot, and it's definitely different, but it definitely took me a long time. I know because of it, I pushed people away in a way, not intentionally. I know in high school, a lot of people thought I was fake, all because they didn't really know me. They didn't really realize that, hey, she's had things happen in her life that have affected her. There are things that have happened that affected her. And even though I think there was a point where everyone knew, I think just about everyone in high school really knew the situation you were in. They knew what had happened. You were open about it, you were like, I think you talked about it. I feel like you posted something or you said something at one point, or I know you wrote a paper too that I think you shared, and because I remember the paper, And I remember reading the paper because I know you interviewed me for the paper. And that was like the starting point for you where I feel like I started to notice you were more open about it. You talked about it. And so everybody knew that your dad had died and what had happened, but nobody knew that I was the one there with you, you know? And so because of that, they were like, they didn't realize what could be wrong with me, like what could have caused me to have any issues. And that just kind of made them assume that, oh, hey, she's just too perfect and all this stuff, when really I did cheer. Cheer was the thing that kept my mind off everything. Cheer was the thing that I could go to and get away from everything. It would get my mind away. It would actually make me happy. It was something for me to work for, and I was good at it. And so when I was good at it, people were like, oh, she's cocky because she's good at it. And I was like, no, I enjoy it. And then it was oh, well, she's fake. Like, no one's always that happy. And it's like, no, I'm not always that happy. I'm just really good at faking it, and I don't know how to not fake it anymore. And it's like, all of that happened, so I had all bad issues. Kind of that just got toppled on all of it. And again, I didn't really talk about it at that time, so it was really hard. And I know my parents didn't know how bad it was for me until senior year of high school, because I never wanted to talk about it, you know, like it took me a long time to ask my mom, but I remember when I finally had a conversation with my mom about it, she told me a lot of little details that I never knew. And it was like a lot of like little things that, like, she told me more of the background of what happened, you know, what led up to the event, that as 10, 11-year-olds, we didn't know that stuff. We didn't know that our parents weren't going to tell us that, you know, like your mom's not going to go and tell you, oh yeah, this is what's going on with your dad right now, you know, because you're young. And I think that also put another impact on it. Was like, once I learned all that, I was like, oh my God, there's like a whole nother side to everything happening here. Holy crap. And yeah, I think now, obviously, being, 22 years, or well, not 22, wow, 12 years ago, I think, like, I don't think of it as an impact anymore, just because there's been so much that's happened in my life since then. I don't automatically go to, oh, this is the core of all my issues, you know? But when you actually sit down and like look at it, like, I know you've had a lot of things happen in your life too, but when we look at everything that has happened, it's like pulling it down and being like, the core of my depression, my anxiety, like all of that it stemmed from that one moment, that 1 hour of not being able to tell you. It stemmed from that. My emotional issues stemmed from that. Like, it's hard for me I can sympathize for someone. I can be like, oh my God, I feel so bad for you. I'm so sorry. But at the same time, I can't visibly show that I'm caring. So I say I have a lack of empathy, because people will tell me something happened and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, like whatever. But I don't really know what to do besides give them a hug. But some people don't want you to hug them. So it's like, I don't know how to respond to that now, just because I didn't get the chance to really respond to all of that. And I think that just kind of was a building block to this whole emotional issue. And it led to other issues down the road, but I think the generic issue really was, for me, was I lost that emotional capacity that we all gain as children. And it took me a long time to even be able to bring back a little bit of it. And it's like, it's probably different. Like I said, it's very different than how other people are affected. Just because, like I said, I'm not family, so it's not like a family member, you know, like his mom or your mom and you and all that stuff. But I'm also not just a passerby friend who found out. I was like, I'm still like in the middle of it, because like we were basically family at that time. Like, I mean, me and you were basically sisters for how like 7 years of our lives, and like that was, we were each other's go-to. Like we hung out all the time. I was always at your house, so in being involved in how everything played out and all of that stuff, I think is really what made it different for me and what made it hit different.
Honestly, hearing Tessa's recount of her version of the story shocked me. I didn't know that she knew, and her mom knew before I did. I didn't understand her loss. For so long, my dad's death has just been a story. A little tidbit of get-to-know-me information. I didn't consider the widespread impact it had on the world of the people around me. For so long, I thought the story of my dad's death was just that. The story of my dad's death. There's so many stories, so many perspectives I didn't consider. I think part of me didn't want to consider them because it was my dad's death. It was my story, and that was it. I was the one with the dead dad. That's the thing about death, though. Just because I felt like my hurt was the worst, that didn't mean that it hurt less for other people. For me, my dad's death was the death of a girl I would have been. It was the death of my childhood. And believe it or not, no matter how much I talked about it, or told people about it, or trauma processed through it, I've never answered the question.
So, how did my dad's death affect me? Other than changing my entire life and screwing up my entire perspective on everything? Not at all. I don't know how to talk about hard things, seriously. I'm recording this right now in the bedroom of a kid in the house where I babysit my boys and they're both sleeping. I can't not work. So no, maybe that's one. I don't know, I have so much bitterness towards this entire situation. When my dad died, everything was different. Everything at home was different. The dynamic that I lived in was different. Home wasn't really fun anymore. His death was something I had to live with just every day. Like, there was nothing in the world at that time when I was 11 that didn't remind me that my dad was dead. Like, I lived with my mom, and my dynamic with my mom was ruined. Not ruined, but it became hard for us to coexist after that. My mom and I are very different people. My dad was kind of like an equilibrium between the two of us. And after that, it was like me against her. She's very type A. I'm extremely artsy and creative, and I'm not very clean. So it wasn't a very good dynamic. She was always stressed out. She ended up working a full-time job and going back to school, so I was always alone. I didn't have any other family in the area, so I would ride the bus home, and I would be alone all night until my mom came home from work, and there was a lot of fighting. It was just not a fun or safe place really for me to be anymore. And then when I was 11, after my dad died, I'd always grown up with this sense of being different, because I was different. I grew up in a small town with lots of white people. I was brown, and I was Asian, and I was adopted. And my parents never made me feel like I wasn't wanted, because they wanted me. They really, really wanted me. So it wasn't something I worried about. But I did feel different. I always felt different, I think. And after my dad died, I had this moment of epiphany. I think it was like shortly after my dad died. I was young, I was 11. And I was like, wow, no one understands me. And it was true, no one did understand me. No one else was brown and Asian and adopted and had a dead dad. That was just me. I'm special. And no one understood, like, the loss that I was going through. Like, no one could, because no one else had a dead parent. No one that I talked to. I remember my dad's death being a suicide really affected me negatively. I was 11 when I first started considering suicide. I was in the 5th grade. I talked often about wanting to jump out a window, or I thought often about, like, impaling myself on the fence if I jumped off the porch. Like, things like that I thought about a lot when I was 11, and then I actively started self-harming when I was 13, and I made a lot of bad choices. I grew up really fast, not only because I was alone most of the time, but also because in the house, grieving openly wasn't a thing. Not to say my mom didn't do her best, but her response was anger and never grief. And I remember being like 14 and being like, oh, I'm over my dad's death. Which obviously I'm not, and I wasn't. But that's just the way that I dealt with it. That's the way that I felt with it. So grieving really never was a thing. I went to grief counseling right after it happened because it was a traumatic event. And my mom wanted to make sure I wouldn't end up totally off the rails, which, sorry, Mom. I did that, but it wasn't like I processed anything. And it wasn't like my family, my mom and I. My family's just my mom and I. That's all we had. We only had each other. It's not like we were like super huggy. We weren't very close. We didn't talk about our feelings. So I just kind of didn't think about it. And because I didn't think about it and it didn't look like normal grief, I made a lot of bad choices. I started going to parties and drinking when I was like 13, maybe 12. I had a lot of problems with self-destruction. I had a lot of problems with emotional processing and anger. I was always angry, which is understandable, I think, looking back, but back then it was like I didn't understand why I was always angry all the time. My dad's death being a suicide really made things different. It wasn't like I got to say goodbye, and I had to really, really quickly realize that my parents, that adults were human, that they were fallible, that they didn't have all the answers. I had to really quickly learn how flawed the people that I thought would be there for me and protect me, that they weren't always going to. I have always had this feeling of abandonment because I felt like if my dad wouldn't live for me, like if he couldn't just live for me, then I wasn't worth it. Like, I couldn't even get someone to live for me. Why would I ever be worth anything else? Why would I be worthy of love? Why would I be worthy of healthy relationships? So there was a time where I literally thought my purpose in life was to be used by other people. I thought that I was just a pawn for other people's pleasure, and I had resigned myself to that fate and that feeling for a long time, well into my 20s. I have a lot of bitterness towards him. I have a lot of bitterness towards him leaving me. I have a lot of bitterness about never getting a goodbye. I was watching an episode of, what is it called? Violet Evergarden? Like late at night. Elle was sleeping and I was just watching the show, and it was an episode where the mom was dying and she wrote her kid 50 letters, one for each year, and I lost it. I was bawling and I was so jealous, and I was really angry and bitter because I was like, she could do that. She could take the time to write 50 letters for her child so she wouldn't be sad. My dad couldn't even say goodbye. He couldn't write a suicide note. He couldn't, couldn't even talk to someone. He couldn't go to therapy. pissed me off. It still pisses me off. And he didn't even get to see me do anything. He didn't get to see me graduate elementary school. He didn't get to see me graduate high school. He doesn't get to listen to this podcast. He doesn't get to meet my 6 snails. He'll never get to meet Elle. He'll never get to see me accomplished and happy. He never told me that he was proud of me. And we had a lot of plans growing up because he loved me and he wasn't perfect. And I know that now better than ever, but he loved me and he made a bunch of promises that he couldn't keep. He promised that if it snowed on Halloween one night, or if it didn't snow on Halloween one night, he would take me and my mom and her family friends to the Broadmoor. And then it snowed the day after, and he never got the chance to take us to the Broadmoor. And he was a Patriots fan, and after he died, the Patriots won on a killer winning streak, and he didn't get to see that. He never gets to meet my cat. He didn't get to experience me, and I didn't get to experience him. And more than anything, I just wish that I knew that he was proud of me. I know that's something that I'll never hear, and I'll never get closure, because he's gone, and he's gone forever. When I was growing up, I was just a really messed up kid. I was messed up about this, and then I was assaulted 2 years after, and I was assaulted 2 years after that, because I was making bad choices, and I didn't care about my safety. I always had this problem for codependency in relationships. I would always pick a guy, and we'd be together in a long-term relationship, and that is where my gap, where my father should be, was, because I didn't have a father figure. And dealing with depression myself, it's pissed me off even more, because it's like, I did it, and I'm fine, and I'm here. And do you know how many M1s I've been on? In the state of Colorado, an M1 is like a 72-hour hold if you're a danger to yourself or others. So if you have like a very violent suicide attempt, or I don't know, if you're threatening suicide and someone does a wellness check on you or something, then you have to get put on a 72-hour hold. I've had many, and it was hard, and I had a lot of things to get past, and obviously I didn't leave unscathed because I was diagnosed with PTSD when I was 17, but I did it, and it makes me wonder why he didn't even try. Like, why didn't he go to therapy? Why didn't he get help? Why didn't he talk to someone? Because I did it. And I understand that when I am in that state, I'm not rational. And when you're in that state, you're not rational, but I'm mad that he didn't even try. Not for me, not for our family. There's also a huge loss of innocence growing up, especially now that I'm older. I know a lot more than I did then. I know that maybe he necessarily wasn't a good person, and I know that he had a lot of mental problems, and that's hard for me, and it taints all of the memories that I have. I don't know if things would have been different if he was here. I don't know if my life would have been better, but maybe I could have been a better person, and maybe I wouldn't have lost so many years just being miserable. Maybe I wouldn't have made so many bad choices. Maybe I wouldn't have been assaulted. Maybe my mom and I would have had more years of a good relationship. Maybe not, but I'll never know, and I hate that. I hate how many years I have spent and wasted recovering from that loss, and every bad decision, every bad thing that happened to me because of that loss, and after that loss. I'm just sad. I'm just sad, I guess. I don't think about it a lot because I can't. Because I can't be miserable like that. Because losing my dad was not the hardest thing or the worst thing I've gone through. And I wish that it was, but it wasn't. And there's just so many layers to, like, there's just so many, I don't know. There's just so much to work through that my dad's death has been the last thing that It hurts the least, but it still hurts. All I've ever wanted is just a nice, peaceful life. I don't want bad things to happen anymore. If my dad could hear this, I would say, God damn it. I'm really pissed off. I still love you even though you weren't perfect, and I didn't really know who you were. I don't know if I would change anything because I'm happy, and I am doing things that I probably wouldn't do if I wasn't so damaged. But I just wonder how different things could be. I wonder how different I could have been. And I'm bitter, and I'm angry, and I'm sad. And I feel all of it at the same time. I miss you, and I'm angry, and I love you, and fuck you. And I don't think that will ever change. I don't think it ever can, because you're never coming back, and you chose not to be here for me. And it's sad. It's sad for you. I feel bad for you. But sad for me too. And I feel bad for me too.
The last person I wanted to talk to was my mom, because she was the closest to the loss. It was her husband and her life, and they were married for like over 20 years or something. Listen, I was a kid when both my parents were alive and did mushy love stuff. It's not like I was paying attention. At first, I was really nervous to ask her, even though she's very supportive of my podcasting endeavors, because although we talk about his death a lot, my mother is not a touchy-feely kind of person. She will tell you she feels a certain way, but she doesn't really show it. So when she told me she'd do it, I was pretty happy. Although she did type out her response and send me a rough draft, which is like the most my mom thing my mom could do.
The death of my husband by suicide in 2009 has profoundly changed my life as well as my daughter's, and has had a lasting impact on both of us. Death by any circumstance is difficult, but death by suicide includes feelings of personal betrayal and abandonment. 1 minute I was a stay-at-home mother and wife, and the next minute I was a widow at 47 and a single mom. What I thought was a stable, comfortable, upper-middle-class life was gone in an instant, and I was left to pick up the pieces by myself. At first I thought we would be okay because we had just purchased our home, we built it, and should have had plenty of money to live on while I stayed at home and raised our daughter. But 24 hours after his death, my family, who was helping to make sense of our finances, told me that my husband had gone through $1.5 million in less than 5 years, had started liquidating some of his investments, and had taken out a loan on our paid-for house so that he could pay for home improvements. I'm sure he thought he could replace the money he had spent at some point, or that he would inherit enough money to replace it, but his choice to take his life when he did left me in the position of having to go back to work full-time. I couldn't afford to stay at home. And that was devastating because my first priority was to stay at home and raise our daughter. Given our financial situation, I didn't have a choice. My past work experience was in the corporate environment, but that meant travel and 60-hour work weeks, which would mean too much time away from my home and daughter. Because I wanted to be at home as much as possible, I knew I needed a job that would allow me to be on her school schedule until she graduated high school. On top of the financial issues, my husband had refused to write a will, so when I discovered that I wasn't the co-owner of our house or cars, as I had thought, I had to hire a lawyer to help me transfer ownership of all our assets and to become the personal representative of his estate. Next, I needed to decide whether we should stay in Colorado where we had friends and I had some possible job connections, or whether we should move in with my parents in Northern California where we really weren't established, while I tried to figure out how to rebuild our lives. Life became very surreal and overwhelming, and with the grief came a lot of fear, hurt, anger, frustration, anxiety, stress, and uncertainty. 2 years after his death, the emotional toll on my daughter manifested in behavioral and mental health struggles, and I became even more overwhelmed. There were times when I just wanted to run away because I didn't think I could manage it all. But God. This is where my life verse comes in. From Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. This was the first Bible verse I had memorized when I became a Christian at 34, and is what I placed my hope on when everything fell apart. I am thankful I already had a relationship in God, because during a seemingly hopeless time, I knew he was in control of our futures, and he was there as protector, provider, counselor, and promise keeper. My prayer that my hardship and lessons could eventually help someone else, they've been answered as I share my story and can comfort others who have lost a loved one to suicide. Part of that faith journey included the miracle of the life insurance company paying out, even though his death was by suicide, which was not typical. 6 months after his death, which was about 6 months earlier than I expected, I was offered a job as a teaching assistant at the same elementary school where I had volunteered when my daughter attended there. Teaching was not my career of choice when I was younger, but was perfect at this point given that my daughter was just entering middle school. Having directed children's ministries at 2 churches while I was retired gave me a love for children and a valuable experience that made teaching a natural transition. After a year as a TA, I knew I needed to get my teaching license to increase my income. The hourly salary for TAs was equal to what I earned when I was in high school. God made sure my sister had accepted a job in higher education just when I needed to go back to school, so she was able to give me a discount on my Master's of Science program. I ended up teaching in special education from 2009 to 2017. During that time, my father managed my investments, the insurance money, and what we had left, and worked hard to increase their value. In 2017, I felt like I needed a break from teaching, so I had asked my financial advisor when I might be able to retire, or could I work part-time. Miraculously, he told me that I could do either. So from 2017 to 2019, I had quit my job in teaching and I worked part-time at my church, and I did some contract work. In 2020, I was able to fully retire comfortably and am now able to use my time to volunteer and pursue my favorite hobbies. The long-term effect my husband's death has had on me is that I'm not sure I will ever trust someone enough to get married again, nor am I interested in letting someone in right now, even after almost 12 years. The trauma of having to rebuild my life, both emotionally and financially, is something I don't ever want to repeat. So, right now, I feel more secure on my own with God as my partner. If it is in God's plan for me to meet someone, I know He will show me the right person at just the right time. Since I always like to think of the positive side of any situation, my husband's suicide taught me that I am stronger than I thought I was, capable of more than I knew, and that I can always count on God to get me through any situation.
The message of this episode isn't don't kill yourself, although that is a good message. Don't kill yourself. The message of this episode is that death touches everyone in different ways. Death is not a one-size-fits-all. Loss is not a step-by-step program. Death seeps into your life in places we don't ever see or think about. Death touches our life experiences, our perceptions, our biases. Death is like watercolor, spreading as far and thin as it wants to. And it's okay if death touches you differently. Everyone's experience with death is different, even if you are grieving for the same person. Everyone has to go through grief alone, because no matter how much anyone understands, that will never heal the pain of loss. No matter how much someone understands, they can never bring back the dead, or bring you closure, or make you forget your memories. And if suicidal ideation is something you struggle with, this episode is not only a sign, but a message. You matter. So much. And if you died today, there would be dozens of people with stories like this to tell about you. Your death has spread wide and far and touched people in ways that you could never imagine. There are so many other stories about my dad that I don't even know about. To someone who was a goofy guy from the hockey team, he was a customer, a coworker, a boss. To some he was crass, the antagonist of their encounters, a bad driver on the freeway. Fragments of his life exist in places that I'll never be able to go. I don't think that death is something that will ever be easy. None of us are untouched by it. We've all known someone who succumbed to death. We will all succumb to death someday. But for some reason, right now, it's something that we all go through alone. And grieving, it isn't just reliving old memories or missing someone. It's reconciling the good, the bad, the terrible, and the wonderful. It's processing the finality of life. It's hatred and confusion and denial. It's people asking you why you haven't moved on yet. People taking back their understanding when you are over it by what they deem a reasonable time. And maybe we don't really know how to make it a less lonely process. Maybe we are the ones bringing casseroles for only the first week. Maybe we are the ones telling people to just get over it. And maybe we don't have to be those people anymore. Hearing these stories of my dad's death changed me. I'd never heard most of these stories before because I never talked about it like this with anyone. Most of my life, I thought my dad's death only impacted me. I thought his death was about me, but it wasn't. My dad's death was about him and everyone he knew, and I never understood how much it affected the people around me. People in my family, people I'd seen every week, every day, people I'd lived with. Maybe now the people that I've talked to and I can be less alone in a process of loss. Maybe we can be the change in talking about grief and talking about death that we need to see. And maybe we can talk to people about understanding the impact of their death, the length to which they are loved. My dad's death didn't have to happen. I understand that words might not be intuitive to suicide prevention. I know that sometimes what people have to say feels like it doesn't matter. But I also know that sometimes it does. I don't know where my journey with my dad's death will go. I know I'll always be sad. I know who I am has forever been impacted by his death, and who I am has been forever impacted by learning about and talking to other people about his death. And I don't know. I think for now that's it. I think that it's okay not to know. I think that death doesn't have to be something you learn a lesson from. It's okay if death and loss are just death and loss. Thank you for listening to this episode. This one means a lot to me, even though I think they all really mean a lot to me. Thank you to everyone on here for being vulnerable and opening up and sharing their stories with me. And thank you guys who come here to listen to me talk about sad things. Thank you for the grace you've given me over my month-long podcast break. This wasn't the way that I envisioned my podcast launch going, and it was hard needing to let go of my work and giving myself the time to heal. Someday I will talk about what happened. I promise. If you want to make sure to keep up with everything The Human Condition, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at The Human Pods. It'll also be in the show description, just a little heads up for you. If you want to follow me and ruin your feed, you can always find me at the little @thingy and EPHEMERALITI. I did it better the last time, but I lost all that footage, so that's what you get, sorry. And that's on Twitter and Instagram, and again that's the little @thingy, and then the word ephemerality, but it has like an I at the end instead of a Y, because it's artsy, you know? Anyways, thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with an interesting one, I promise. It'll be kind of sad, mostly educational. But still fun. Please don't leave because you don't like education. It'll be... I was trying to mix words, fun, and education together, but it wasn't happening. I hope you guys have a great day, night, and I will see you guys next time. Thank you. Laters.